what the renewed economic stimulus will look like, and America desperately needs it because it's still in a worse hole than it was at the peak of the GFC. We told you on Wednesday how Trump had tried to outflank Pelosi by writing memoranda that unilaterally took care of the more urgent concerns. But there's huge problems with them. They're very complicated. No one knows how they're supposed to work. For example, the extra unemployment benefits. Now, they're supposed to be the federal government pays $300 and the state governments pay $100.
Yep.
But this is what the director of his economic council, Larry Kudlow, had to say.
And I think it's going to come to about $1,200 per person. That's a huge
You keep saying
wage
$1,200 per person. Are you talking about in addition to the unemployment that they're already getting?
Oh, no.
Where does that number
that's
come
the
from?
Payroll. I beg your pardon. The $1,200 will come from the payroll tax deferral.
Okay, we're going to get to that. Okay,
this,
all right, because there's a lot of numbers here, and it's a little confusing. I want to get to payroll tax in a minute. Go ahead.
It should be $800. I beg your pardon. It should be $800 for the unemployment.
800 or 400?
No, it should be $800. If the states step up, we're prepared to match. That should come out $400 federal, $400 states.
Okay, we'll move on because I think it's not what the president said, and it's a bit confusing. And I think the fact that it's not entirely known is very telling.
It certainly is very telling. No one has an idea what's going on. This is where the mail-in voting comes in, because Pelosi's insisting on $3.5 billion in the package to make sure mail-in voting can occur smoothly. Trump is refusing to let that happen.
They want $3.5 billion, and they're not going to do a deal that's good for the American people. Therefore, they're not going to get the $3.5 billion. Therefore, they can't do the universal mail-in vote. It's very simple. How are they going to do it if they don't have the money to do it?
Okay, so Pelosi is saying the stimulus isn't happening without the mail-in voting funding. Trump is saying the stimulus isn't happening with the mail-in voting. I've no idea what's going to happen with the mail-in voting or the economy in the meantime. It's a complete mess.
Yep. Well, yeah, they're playing a game of chicken right now, and
the economy is in between them.
And the election is coming at them like a train through a railway viaduct at the moment. So, look, it's a huge problem. Meanwhile, the states are looking at, well, okay, what are the ways around this, including things like building, 300-kilogram steel drop boxes that are basically ballot boxes in front of town halls and things that become, instead of putting your mail-in ballot into the postal system, it goes straight into this drop box, and that could be one of the ways to make sure that things aren't getting lost in the system. But it's a huge disaster, and clearly it's all playing to Trump's benefit because, as we've discussed numerous times, if the result is unclear or uncertain for several weeks, all of the seeds of doubt that he has been sowing over the last many months about the possibility that there could be fraud and things going missing and everything else, this is all heading towards a very, very confusing election result at a time when pretty much everything in American life is very confusing and dangerous. It's a recipe for disaster.
I agree.
All right, let's have a look at the polls this week. And the national polls all had Biden up by between 4 and 12 points, actually 13 points in one poll. Trump's vote has slipped into the 30s, according to a poll from YouGov yesterday. Biden leading by a full 10 points there. Biden's lead is back up over 7 percentage points in the average of national polls. The first post-VP announcement polls are coming in today, and according to Morning Consult, 53% of voters approve of the Harris pick. 29% say they disapprove. 84% of Democrats are happy, so too are 79% of black voters. 44% of independents are happy, while 27% of independents say they do not approve. According to an Ipsos poll this morning, 47% of voters say Harris is an excellent or good choice. 24% say they don't have an opinion. 29% say Harris is not a good choice or a poor choice for VP. Head-to-head against Mike Pence, Kamala Harris has higher net approval right now, +5 overall. Pence is at -14. Asked if they found the VP candidate inspiring, Harris Harris comes out on top, but maybe not by as much as you would expect given the historic nature. First woman of colour nominated for the office, compared to probably the least colourful politician, literally and figuratively, we've ever seen, Chaz.
It's true. While we're talking polling, 538 have released their election model, which at this point in time is giving Biden a 72% chance of victory. Coincidentally, almost an identical probability they gave Hillary Clinton of victory in 2016. Although there is much more uncertainty now, 81 days out than it was the day before with Hillary Clinton, so that is a better result for Biden. Interestingly, their popular vote margin right now is about 7 points, but the margin of their tipping point state, which is Pennsylvania, is only 5 points. So once again, there's the seeds of a situation where the Democrats win the popular vote, but Trump wins re-election. So keep an eye out on those numbers.
Yeah, it was in 2016 that Kamala Harris became just the second woman of colour elected to the United States Senate. The first was Carol Moseley Braun, elected as a Democrat from Illinois in 1992. She served in the Senate with Joe Biden and endorsed his campaign for president this year. Carol Moseley Braun also later became a United States ambassador, and in 2004, she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination.
My grandfather fought for this country in World War I in France, and he came back. He couldn't sit in the front of the bus or even vote, but he did so because he believed in the promise of America. I'm running for president because I want to protect and preserve it.
And Carol Moseley Braun joins us from Chicago. Madam Ambassador, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Biden has now in one gaffe implied that authentic black people only vote Democrat. And in another gaffe, he's implied that the black community isn't as diverse as the Latino community. So at one point in time, do you get worried that the Democrat nominee is just taking the black vote for granted?
Remember, I worked with him for 6 years, and he presided over my confirmation as ambassador to New Zealand. And so we go back, I've known him for a long time. And so I can tell you, while he does have a particular ability to, the old foot and mouth, right? He does that from time to time. At the same time, I can tell you that I do not know anyone in politics who is as non-racial or non-racialized as Joe Biden. He gets it in terms of race. He understands the issue. He's always been on the right side of history in terms of black people, as far as I know, over the years. And that's why I've been such an enthusiastic supporter. I wouldn't have done this but for the fact that I know this person. I've seen him in operation. I know how he responds in situations. And so does he have an assumption that he's entitled to the black vote? No, I don't think he does. But would he like to have it? I'm sure he would. And I think he's going to do everything he can to reciprocate, because he's a very loyal person as well.
Ambassador, from very early on when Joe Biden said that his running mate would be a woman, and now with his choice, criticisms have abounded. This is tokenism, this is a diversity hire. You faced your fair share of sexism and racial prejudice in your political career. How do you think they can manage this issue? Is it even an issue?
Let me say this, and you used the exact right word when you said prejudice. You can't really argue with crazy. The fact is that people will come up with whatever they want to come up with to try and undermine a situation. But I know that Joe Biden is the most qualified person to be president. He has a platform for our country that will move us forward instead of backwards. He's right on the issues. And I think that at the end matters more than anything else. And I'm just hopeful that we don't wind up with one of these diversionary campaigns. I mean, campaigns are full of everybody coming up with every way they can possibly undermine the opposition. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get through this without too much rancor, although there's likely to be a lot of it. But I'm just hopeful it comes out that Joe Biden pulls it off and wins the election, because elections have uncertain outcomes. And even though the polls look really good right now, I would not want to jinx it by predicting a Biden win. But I hope that he will win, and that truth will out, and that sensibility and logic will out also, that people will see the correct path and will vote for him.
And Ambassador, I'm really interested in your take on the current debate over the Confederate flag. In recent weeks, we've seen it finally come down in Mississippi. We're seeing a reappraisal of a lot of Confederate symbols. That was an issue that you championed in the 1990s as senator around the Confederate flag. I'm wondering, given that President Trump is kind of standing by it to a large extent, how do you think that issue is going to play out by November?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, I was the only Black person in the United States Senate when that issue came up. And it came up in a bizarre way. It came up as an amendment to a bill to authorize a patent for a sweetener. And one of my staffers found it and is like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So I went to the committee chairman at the time, and who was Joe Biden, and said to him, I can't stand by and watch this happen. He agreed with me. He actually helped me kill it in committee. We killed it in committee, and then I looked up, and Jesse Helms had tried to revive the matter on the floor. So, and then I went over and we had the knockdown, drag out debate. Just to speak his name, I'm grateful to Hal Heflin, who's deceased now, who was the senator from Alabama, who got up and said his grandfather had been a general in the Confederate Army, and it was time for us to move on from these issues and to support the one flag, the Stars and Stripes, as the flag of the United States. And so his support was one of the reasons that some of the Southerners came around and helped me defeat a patent for the Confederate flag. But again, we're talking almost 30 years ago. So that it's back is a function, again, back to the politics. This president sees it in his interest to stoke the fires of racial division and divisiveness and to stoke arguments among people. And this is one of the arguments that I think he thinks he can win on. I pray that he's not right.
Now, given their support, Joe Biden is going to owe the Black community a massive debt if he is elected president this year. So next year, what would be the one major reform that you think would be of most use to the Black community?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that's a profound question, because it really does strike to the heart of a lot of these issues. Part of the problem of dealing with the whole issue of race in this country is that even though the civil rights movement began to give us social integration, our economy has never been integrated, or at least it hasn't been yet. And so I think that addressing some of the economic issues that plague Black America will be very, very important. And I believe Joe Biden has the capacity, certainly knows how to make government work. He can certainly do that. So that'll be, I think, the single most important thing. There are obviously other issues like the whole question of educational opportunities, question of voting rights, and making sure that the gerrymandering stops here in the United States. Because right now, districts are drawn up here in the United States. Another thing that foreigners don't understand, our districts are drawn up on the state level. And in some cases, they're drawn up so the politicians get to pick who their voters will be, not the other way around. And so it's really bizarre, and that's got to get fixed, because until it is fixed, you will not have equality in terms of the vote here in this country. So I think that dealing with gerrymandering and the electoral system, dealing with economic integration for African Americans, educational opportunities for African Americans, those will be things that Joe Biden will be looked to begin to try to correct. And whether he can do it in one fell swoop is an open question. I'm just praying that he's given a chance to do so.
Finally, do you give Trump any credit for actively seeking the affection of the Black community on multiple occasions in a way that Republicans usually don't even try to? Or do you see that as simply box ticking?
To be fair, he's done the crime bill that they passed, that he sponsored and pushed, has done a good thing. And so I'm happy about that, because they've begun to address some of the systemic issues in terms of how our criminal justice system operates here in the United States. And so that's a good thing. I mean, my grandmother said, you always try to find something nice to say about somebody, even if you don't oppose them on everything else. But so that would be the one thing I would give him plaudits or kudos for, is the crime bill but past that, I mean, it's a disaster on just about, as far as I'm concerned, on every front. So disaster on international relations, it's a disaster on the environment. You could write down the list.
Ambassador Carol Moseley-Braun, many thanks indeed for having a fireside chat with us.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Earlier today, President Trump announced a breakthrough in Middle East diplomacy, with the United Arab Emirates becoming just the third Arab nation to give full diplomatic recognition of the State of Israel. In keeping with the times, the historic step was announced on Twitter.
Huge breakthrough today, historic peace agreement between our two great friends, Israel and the United Arab Emirates.
The Palestinians are not too happy with this, though. Israel is being a little bit vague on whether they really will stop settlement activity in occupied lands. This doesn't really feel like another Camp David or Oslo Accord, but it is certainly a much-needed win for President Trump on foreign policy. He has been talking